Polls in the Senate primary in Texas are about to close, but they've been extended. Why? There was some confusion about which polls were which, and the Democrats complained, and they got the time extended by a judge 2 hours. I'm sure that'll be conspiracy fodder, but whatever. Here's the proposition I want to deal with, okay? Who wins this race is an interesting window into the future for the Democratic Party. Now, it's a little skewed, the analysis, because Texas Democrats are like really lefty Democrats. I'm not disrespecting them. I'm just saying Jasmine Crockett is very much the kind of muscular response, outraged response to Trump that left flank Democrats want. But James Tallarico is a really interesting proposition for the Democrats. He's a moderate who lives his faith and talks about how the administration is not living the faith that it supposes to. I want to bring in Democratic strategist Amisha Cross and Texas conservative radio host Mark Davis. It's good to see you both, friends. Amisha, how do you handicap it in terms of who you think is going to win this and why?
Well, this is tough. What we know now is that so many different demographics have come out in this race that we have not seen come out in the Texas race in a very long time, and a lot of new voters as well. I think for Jasmine Crockett, she obviously has the black vote. And for Tallarico, he was able to peel off a lot of Latinos and a lot of traditional Democrats and some moderates. In large part, and I know you've covered this over the past at least 20 minutes, there has been a delay in some of the vote count. So we will see what happens in some of the urban districts that we assume Jasmine Crockett will carry. But the polls have been up and down. Originally, it showed that, you know, Jasmine was kind of a runaway a few weeks ago, and now it's kind of teetered in the other direction. Honestly, it's going to depend on who showed up, and we're not going to know that until later tonight.
Am I safe to say, Mr. Davis, that you would rather run against Crockett than Tallarico?
Probably, but I think a lot of that speculation is a little ill-informed and premature, because you never know. It's kind of like the scuttlebutt here on the Republican side that says that Cornyn is absolutely automatically a better general election candidate than Paxton. Maybe, maybe not. I will tell you this, as the Republican in the room, let me stick up for honest and clean and fair elections for Democrats. It's a lot of the Democrat counties, Dallas County and some others, that are having some difficulties. Whatever it takes to keep those open and get those right are a good idea. With a little bit of early returns, your big cities are what come in first, and Tallarico has a bit of a lead there, and so does Cornyn. What's going to happen in Tallarico and Crockett is that Jasmine's is the big city vote, and if she's gotten most of that big city vote in your Dallas, your Houston, your Austin, your El Paso, it might not be looking good for her, but again, that's way premature. Cornyn has an early lead too, but this one is going to tighten, because if suburban and rural Texas still has a lot of returns to come in, that roughly 5 or 6 point lead that Cornyn has right now should shrink.
Amisha, what does it mean to you that Paxton is doing as well as he is when Cornyn has been hammering him on fairly legit personal issues?
I mean, Texas voted in large part 3 times for Donald Trump, and he had gotten hammered on multiple personal issues as well. It shows that people can look beyond that. We know that Paxton has a shady personal past, and one that became known nationally. We know that, you know, his ex-wife made some unsavory comments about some of his personal behavior as well. It seemingly does not matter to the voting populace. It is not necessarily shocking, because again, they denied it with the President of the United States as well. So we'll see how it turns out. This is still really early. I agree with my counterpart here, but I do think that for those who thought that Paxton was dead in the water, most of those people weren't Texas.
Mark, let's end on this. The idea of, does the Iran operation introduce a new variable that MAGA is going to want to hear, maybe a nuanced answer at a minimum, or say, no, I don't like it in the main?
The notion of a large MAGA rift on this is complete mythology. Do not take the rantings of Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly as being indicative of MAGA. I'm not suggesting unanimity by any stretch, but generally speaking, Trump supporters are on board for this. Trump supporters trust him, and they think and they hope and they pray that it's going to work out well.
Well, everybody's hoping it's going to work out. The question is I'll tell you one thing that definitely has to die, and I'm sure just about every News Nation viewer agrees. Man, you cannot be punished for asking questions. It doesn't mean that you think Trump is bad or the plan is bad or the regime is good or you don't care what happens in Iran because you're questioning what isn't known and what seems inconsistent, okay? We are critical thinkers. We are not lemmings. Remember that. Leland Vittert, right now.
Yeah, Tom Brokaw said once, it's not the questions that get us in trouble, it's the answers.
Ha! That is the truth. That is the truth.
All right, from your lips to God's ears. Good talking to you, my friend. Chris, great show. Welcome to the program. Live look at pictures of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Doha, Qatar, 3 cities now in the crosshairs of Iran's counterattack tonight. President Trump's operation to free Iran and end the regime of terror is turning into a full-blown Middle East war. Libby Dean, standing by at the White House. Is the president's next move declaring victory or doubling down? Robert Sherman on the ground in Tel Aviv as Israel might invade parts of Lebanon. Jack Carr, Elika Laban, Mark Short on if the president can still win the hearts and minds of the American public. All this, plus Mark McKinnon, Kendall Scudder, tell us what the Texas primaries tell us about American politics. Mike Rogers on mounting fears of Iranian sleeper cells, and if Kristi Noem is up to the job of defending our homeland. But first, our Why It Matters segment tonight. History tells us first you sell a war, and then you start a war. President Trump is doing the opposite. When America goes to war, there is always a clear playbook. The White House wages a war of words for months before a single shot is fired. There is a reason for that. Tonight, the Pentagon released the names of 4 of the 6 Americans killed by an Iranian drone attack in Kuwait. Captain Cordy Cork, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor, Sergeant First Class Noah Teachins, and Sergeant Declan Cody. Those are the names. We'll know the next 2 in about 24 hours. Presidents sell the war to the American public first, so when our men and women in uniform come home in caskets, we all instinctively know why it was worth it. For better or worse, the war, the real war, didn't start until the president won the public relations war. Compare that to today. The Trump administration spent this week so far justifying a war that has already started.
You see, we were having negotiations with these lunatics, and it was my opinion that they were going to attack first. They were going to attack if we didn't do it.
They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them.
They needed to be saying that last week. And to be fair, if you build up to a war, it gives the enemy more inclination you're going to actually launch one. That's happened in all of the recent American wars. George H.W. Bush turned Saddam's invasion of Kuwait into the moral question of our time. Same with Bill Clinton, who made the case for American-led intervention in Kosovo. That fight went on for weeks to convince the American people. The younger President Bush sent Colin Powell, America's most respected man at the time, to the United Nations, and then got congressional approval before invading Iraq. So a few things can be true at once. The world is a safer place now that a bunch of homicidal maniacs have met with Allah. And America's military is destroying Iran's ability to threaten the world. Here's the admiral in charge of Operation Epic Fury.
More than 50,000 troops, 200 fighters, 2 aircraft carriers, and bombers from the United States are participating in this operation. We are also sinking the Iranian Navy, the entire Navy. Thus far, we've destroyed 17 Iranian ships.
Unquestionably, we are winning the war against Iran. We have said over and over that is a very good thing. And it is not free. There is going to be a cost in American lives. There's going to be a cost in attacks around the Middle East on our allies. So that is all unquestionably true. But 2 things can be true at once. The president is now in a political war against some of the loudest voices on the right.
We're in another war, and we've got American troops being killed.
No one should have to die for a foreign country. I don't think those 4 service members died for the United States.
This war is waged purely because Israel wanted it to be waged.
It's easy to say, oh, this will be quick, and like maybe this one will be. I mean, maybe Donald Trump will just stop. But man, it seems unlikely.
It's not that these people are bad people, some of them are, but they have a complete misunderstanding of history in the world, and that's fine. But they're very popular on the right. And friendly fire during battle is crippling. One must fight their own people, and at the same time, it gives quarter to the political enemy. This is true no matter which side is waging the war. In this case, Democrats now see Trump as very vulnerable.
If the case for war were strong, it would be consistent. Instead, the rationales change by the hour. Regime change, nuclear weapons, missiles, defense, preemptive. Which is it? When the justification keeps shifting, a strategy is missing. There is no strategy.
Okay, so Chuck Schumer loves the alliteration thing. And Chuck Schumer would criticize Trump for curing cancer, but politics is politics. And the American people right now are not convinced. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans disapprove of military action in Iran. 56% think long-term conflict is likely, and they very well might be right. The last Gallup poll, compare those numbers to this. The last Gallup poll in 2003, before the invasion of Iraq, showed 64% of Americans in favor. History should richly reward Trump for taking on the Iranian cancer that has grown for 47 years. American policy towards Iran for half a century has been failed. But right now he's fighting two wars, one against Iran and the other for America's hearts and minds. With that, we go to, well, ground zero for that war for America's hearts and minds, the White House, where we find our Libby Dean.
Leland, what I learned today from senior Trump administration officials is that third round of negotiations with the Iranians, with the United States, that was the key tipping point in all of this. And those negotiators who were actually in the room in Geneva, what they described today was this collapse in talks that they then briefed the president on when they returned here to the United States. Then what we heard from the president the next day is he said he wasn't happy with how those negotiations went. And then behind the scenes, we saw him greenlit this operation in Iran. And one senior official actually characterized Iran's nearly 10-page proposal as, quote, Swiss cheese, saying it was full of holes. And negotiators also accused Iran of stalling and playing for time in those final days of those discussions, which, of course, completely fell apart. But since then, there hasn't been any direct contact between Trump's top negotiators. That's, of course, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner and the Iranians. In this phone call today that was an hour long with reporters and these senior officials, they also said there was no potential for that coming as well, these talks between the Iranians and the United States. Now, today was also the first time President Trump took questions at length about the war with Iran, and he had no clear answer on what leadership will actually look like in Iran, given the United States has actually killed the majority of the candidates that President Trump said he had in mind. With that, over now to Robert Sherman, who is live in Tel Aviv. Robert.
Hey there, Libby, and hey there, Leland. Well, Iran tonight is lashing out across the region. 2 ballistic missiles fired at Qatari territory. One was shot down. The other made impact at Al Udeid Air Base, our largest base in the region. Thankfully, no casualties reported there. But it's not just U.S. troops that Iran is targeting, also diplomatic missions. The U.S. consulate in Dubai was struck by an Iranian drone here this evening, hitting the parking lot near one of the buildings there, sparking fires. Again, no casualties reported. Coming just 24 hours after the U.S. embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was hit by drones. Again, thankfully, no casualty reported there. But you see the strategy that Iran is employing here. That's why the United States is focusing on hitting Iranian ballistic missile storage facilities, launchers, trying to knock out those threats before they're put in the air. And I have to tell you, Leland, we've been here in Israel. We've still come under fire multiple times from Iran. We are seeing the number of ballistic missiles steadily decreasing day by day that come our way. Leland?
Yeah, they're running out of inventory, and then also the hunt for those ballistic missile launchers and supply warehouses is turning successful. Robert Sherman, Libby Dean, thank you very much. Our super panel, Jack Carr, former Navy SEAL, author of Targeted Beirut, Elika Laban, Iranian activist Mark Short, former Trump White House legislative director. Good to see all of you. Normally it's ladies first, but I want to start with Jack, Target Beirut. And this is the story I would encourage everyone to read of the Beirut barracks bombing. Iran's really first suicide bomb attack against America. Hezbollah killed well over 200 American service members. Jack, you look at that polling about how Americans feel about the attacks on Iran. Do you think Americans really understand, A, how evil Iran is, and B, the lengths they will go to try and, as they chant, death to America?
Well, I'm curious what that kind of polling would have looked like in October of 1983 or in April of 1983 when our embassy was hit first, killed 63 people, 17 Americans, many of them working for the CIA. Then we go into a very bloody summer where our Marines are there as peacekeepers in Lebanon. And then we get to October 1983, 241 Americans. The Marines had not lost that many people in a single day since Iwo Jima in World War II. But after that, this is where I'm curious about how the polling would have played out. We still were under that specter of Vietnam that loomed large over the Reagan administration. But what they did was rely on a lot of tough talk in the aftermath of that event. And then we left not the region, but Lebanon as quietly as you can in early 1984. So we taught the enemy that terrorism works. So I'm very curious if we had committed to avenging the not just avenging the Marines and the servicemen killed in October 1983 and in April, but teaching another lesson to not just those who want to do us harm in the Middle East, but the world. And we would have taught them that terrorism doesn't work if we did something more akin to what the Israelis did after Munich in the early 70s. With Operation Wrath of God. If we had done something like that, and if we had utilized our special operations and intelligence capabilities to go after those responsible, which were Iranian proxy forces. So we taught the world that terrorism works, and specifically we taught Iran that proxy terrorist forces work.
Yeah, and we've paid the price in American lives since then, and this, to your point, is avenging that. Beginning of the avenge of that. Elika, speaking of Iran and inside Iran, CNN's reporting that CIA teams in Erbil, Iraq, that's the northern part of Iraq where the Kurds are training Kurdish fighters and Kurdish resistance organizations to begin an Iranian revolution inside the Kurdish side of Iran. The Kurds are historically quite Western-friendly, quite friendly to the United States. Is that the way that the overthrowing of the Iranian regime needs to start?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, the people up until now have been unarmed. You know, this entire time that we've been asking for help to the international community, the overwhelming response that we've been gotten is that Iranians need to free themselves. Now, obviously, we know this is not has never been a proportionate fight. You cannot fight unarmed against people using military-grade weapons against you. And so from the very beginning, these were one of the simple asks. Why don't we arm the people? There's obviously been a little bit of contention about what happens when you arm the people in terms of other extremist groups potentially rising to power with the use of those arms. But I think it all depends on really how we envision this regime change happening. If this regime change is going to happen as an external operation driven by the United States and Israel, then we need to place full faith and confidence behind that military campaign to remove this regime. But if it's a joint effort, and if it is a joint effort that needs to come from the people, then those people will have to be armed in order to facilitate the overthrow of the regime.
Yeah, well, President Trump and others have already said that it is going to have to come from inside. To your point, you've got to train people, you've got to support them, and you got to provide them with weapons. Evidently, they've already been provided with Starlinks. Mark Short, to you, there is this war of words now, a public relations war. Can President Trump and his cabinet and some friendly Republicans convince Americans in the midst of this war of why we need to fight it?
Leland, yes, he can. I think that this is a noble cause, and the president, you know, I think if he's successful here, it could transform the Middle East for generations to come. Not only are millions of Iranians excited about the Ayatollah being eliminated and have an opportunity to change their country, as y'all have said, it's been 47 years of a war against the West, whether or not it was Beirut, the embassy in Iran, whether or not it's been the funding of Hamas and Hezbollah, the Houthis, targeted assassination attempts on American leaders. They have been trying to kill Americans for 47 years, and the West.
You don't need to convince me of that, Mark. But I agree. Why is that message so lost?
Leland, I think that... Well, because, Leland, I think that part of the challenge is that the president's campaign rhetoric in 24 would have led American voters to think the exact opposite of this. And so, as you said in your monologue, that there could have been a longer lead into this, explaining the case for why to Americans this is important, not just not just to the Middle East, but to America's national security. And so, yeah, I think the president has an innate ability to win messaging wars. And so I think that traditionally you were right. It would have been a messaging campaign ahead of any sort of action, kinetic action that was taken. But can he still convince Americans about this? Yes. But I think the second challenge he has, Leland, also is that in the midst of this midterm cycle, there's an affordability crisis. And if energy prices continue to spike and skyrocket, and it'll feed the narrative on inflation that I think runs counter to what he's trying to convince Americans regarding his trade policy and other initiatives of trying to lower costs. And so I think those are a couple headwinds for him. But can he? Yes, he can.
Well, inflation will come from energy prices, and that is if the Iranians are successful in closing the Strait of Hormuz. It's about a 25-mile wide piece of water.
Even if they're not.
Yeah, well, they've been successful.
Even if they're not, you know, you've already had the LNG facilities in Qatar closed down. You have other, oil facilities getting blown up. And so, yes, if the Straits of Hormuz are closed, it'll be even higher. But you're still going to see elevated energy prices.
Right now, they are closed. We have the animation up right now, not because the Iranians have been able to, but because the insurance companies won't insure any ships that go through them. Jack, to you, go back to your experience as a Navy SEAL mixed with a New York Times #1 best-selling author. Those two things, this story of closing the Strait of Hormuz, is the Navy ready to protect American shipping or worldwide shipping going through there?
I would think that would have been thought through ahead of time, because it's one of the most likely courses of action is that waterway is going to experience some pressure. So taking over the gas and oil platforms and making sure that shipping continues, not unabated probably, because there's so much happening in that part of the world, but continues as unabated as possible. I'm sure would have been part of the planning process here. But there's so many things at play. I mean, this has been a pillar of American policy for multiple administrations. Both parties has been keeping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. They've got different ways of doing that. And so my question really is, and it's a question to me as well, is how close do you let them get to having that? Is it 5 years? Is it 1 year? Is it 6 months? Is it 2 weeks? What is palatable to the American people when it comes from an explanation standpoint? And then how much do you trust that intelligence? So those are questions for all of us.
Elika, where is the celebrations and the protests that we were led to believe are going to happen? And we're all used to things happening in a cable news cycle and on our Twitter feeds. Is it too early to be asking why aren't the Iranian people in the streets?
You're talking about the people inside Iran?
Yes.
Well, I mean, there's a war right now inside Iran, but actually the celebrations are everywhere. If you look on social media, they are celebrating from inside their homes right now. They're celebrating from their apartments. They're screaming in celebration for the death of the supreme leader. But at the same time, you have to remember that both Donald Trump, President Trump, and the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi both instructed that Iranians should be staying inside their homes right now because it's very dangerous outside.
Well, that's a good point.
So it's during the campaign.
Yeah, you're gonna have to see something. It's not gonna happen in days. It's gonna happen in weeks or months. Mark Short, Jack Carr, Elika Lamont, thank you all very much. This is a good question. What is a Democrat in 2026? Texas will tell us. The polls just closed. Back with breaking news on this Tuesday night. Live look at some of the watch parties in Texas where polls just closed. The outcome of 2 primary elections will tell us exactly where the political parties are headed in the midterms. The Democratic Party right now is going through a Tea Party-like revolution, and Texas provides the perfect test case. 2 progressives, a firebrand Congresswoman, Jasmine Crockett, known for her foul-mouthed, Trump-hating rhetoric, up against the Texas Golden Boy, James Talrico, Christian Democrat trying to pull the party back to the center. Their fight will define what Democrat means in 2026. GOP side, it's just as intense and a little more personal. Scandal-plagued, MAGA-loved Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, indicted and unapologetic, is gunning for Senator John Cornyn, the ultimate D.C. insider. And in this race, nothing is sacred.
Crooked Ken Paxton cheated on his wife. She's divorcing him on biblical grounds.
John Cornyn of Texas told CBS News he simply doesn't think Donald Trump can get elected president.
Paxton's wrecking another home, sleeping around with a married mother of 7.
Now, Ken Paxton is running for Senate to stand with President Trump and help him make America great again.
The wife cheater and fraud, or the Texas workhorse?
With us now, Mark McKinnon, creator and executive producer of The Circus on Showtime, Kendall Scudder, chairman of the Texas Democratic Party. Good to see you, gentlemen, both of you. Kendall, I'm going to start with you just because I think the Democratic primary is a little more interesting politically in a way for the Democrats. What is a Democrat in 2026?
A Democrat is a person that will take on whatever billionaire, whatever banker, whatever bootlicking bastard we have to make sure the little guy gets his seat at the table.
So you put Paxton and Cornyn in that same, all those adjectives apply?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay. I see where this is going. Mark, putting Kendall's adjectives aside here for a second, we've seen this before that Trump kind of enjoys these primary fights. Is that for Republicans that have to defend in Texas? Is that purifying or petrifying for what is going to be one of the most expensive midterm Senate races the country's ever seen?
Well, you're right, Leland, and both these races really represent the challenges for both parties. On the Republican side, we have a heated contested primary against a guy, John Cornyn, who, if he were uncontested, would win this thing by 20 points in a walk. But he is not MAGA enough for the pure MAGA loyalists who prefer somebody like Paxton, who was the tip of the spear in the January 6th litigation, leading it as the Texas Attorney General. And then, of course, you've got a congressman from Houston that's going to throw it into a runoff almost certainly. So the bad news for Republicans is that either way this goes, they're going to have to spend a lot of money that they wouldn't otherwise have to spend just to get through a primary that when this should have been a walk for Republicans. And then, of course, given the outcome, it could become very problematic in the general election.
Kendall, fair to say you guys would a lot rather run against Ken Paxton than John Cornyn, right?
I mean, I don't think it matters who we want to run against. We're going to be running against Ken Paxton. Runoffs in Texas are where Republican incumbents go to die. So John Cornyn's going to make it into this runoff, and he's not going to survive it in May. That's just, I think it's like 95% of Republican incumbents that go to runoffs don't make it out. So John Cornyn can enjoy his ride to the runoff. We're going to be running against Ken Paxton in November.
Okay, so who has a better chance against Ken Paxton, though, in November, Crockett or Talrico?
Well, you know, as the administrator of the primary, I don't pick sides of that, but I will tell you that I think that both of them have different strategies.
Kendall, I got a better answer for you. Whoever wins tonight.
There you go. That is what I should have said. You're hired.
Mark? Live results going in. James Talrico now leading by 8 points. The betting markets had Talrico at about 85%. So Crockett would have to have a major upset. Sufficing to say, Democrats would a lot rather have James Talrico, correct?
No question about it. Listen, they're both extremely talented candidates, but Talrico has a much more sort of moderate centrist approach and has a strategy where he thinks he should actually try and appeal to independent voters and soft Trump voters. Crockett says she doesn't even want to try and do that. So in Texas, you've got to have those independents. You've got to get some of the soft Trump voters to win in Texas, or you're not going to win in the general election. So I think that Talrico is going to be a much better candidate. He's a once-in-a-generation candidate. I love how he has embraced values in the Bible in a way that Democrats haven't in a long time. I think it's going to be a really interesting race to watch.
Okay. We're going to play real quickly Talrico versus Crockett because it's pretty interesting, the two versions of these Democratic candidates.
I think of politics now less as left versus right and much more as top versus bottom.
The most unpatriotic people that we have in this country are MAGA and this president.
We are, I think, trying to build a movement that includes Democrats, independents, and Republicans.
I don't even know what to call him. I've called him so many things. But this wannabe Hitler.
Our nation is so divided that we can't even share the Super Bowl anymore.
Texas is racist.
Kendall, how are Democrats going to win the center if the candidates, the loudest voices in the room, the people raising the most money and getting the most hits on cable news, are the ones calling the people in the middle racist and unpatriotic and un-American?
Look, the argument that you will hear from Congresswoman Crockett's camp, and I think it's a fair argument, is that Texas is 47th in the country in voter turnout. And there were 1.1 million Democrats who voted in 2020 that stayed home in 24. And so what those people want are Democrats that aren't going to negotiate away the things that are important to them. And that perhaps driving out our base to actually show up and turn out to vote could put us in a good spot. And here we are outvoting Republicans in a primary in Texas, which no one thought was possible. So the one who wins today is going to be the one who is best at turning voters out. And that's going to bode well for us in November.
All right, live results now for Paxton and Cornyn. DDHQ will have the call when they are able to. They got to get over, one of these two guys has to get over 50% or it goes to a runoff. Mark, I will leave you with this. Is it possible, would you be willing to say possible, that if it is Talrico, Ken Paxton, which is, I think, what Kendall is hoping for, that the tens of millions of dollars that will be spent by Democrats to try to turn Texas blue might be worth it?
Listen, I'm the guy I worked for the last Democratic statewide official who won. That was Ann Richards, and that was 35 years ago. So I'm always pushing back against the narrative that, oh, this time it's going to happen, this time it's going to happen. This time it could happen. A perfect storm is lining up. If it's Talrico versus Paxton, I think there's a real shot. Because remember, it wasn't long ago that Beto O'Rourke almost beat Ted Cruz. He came within 2 or 3 points. And I think Talrico will be an even better candidate. I think he's learned those lessons. I think Paxton is even less popular than Ted Cruz.
Yeah, well said, especially about Talrico. Certainly not as divisive, at least when you listen to him, maybe when you dig deeper, but in terms of talent than Beto. Mark, Kendall, thank you both very much. Here we go. This is the 2024 debate between the parties. Back now to Iran, as fears of Iranian sleeper cells in the homeland point to the essential role of the Department of Homeland Security. Why Republican senators wonder if we have the right person running DHS. The threats from Iranian sleeper cells mean being the Department of Homeland Security Secretary is more than cosplaying a Border Patrol agent on a horse. Evidence right there. For those who don't get the reference, yes, I'm talking about Secretary Kristi Noem's photo ops, not just one, but the ones on horses, the ones on boats, the ones in El Salvadorian prisons, the ones with guns. Over the weekend, we saw an attack on U.S. soil by a man wearing a Property of Allah sweatshirt and an Iranian flag T-shirt underneath. You can see it here. That was the gunman in Austin, Texas. There are now warnings to Americans to leave the Middle East, alongside big cybersecurity warnings from the FBI. The Department of Homeland Security was formed in the wake of the 9/11 attacks to stop attacks just like this. We are arguably in the most dangerous moment for terrorist attacks since 9/11, and there are serious questions about whether DHS Secretary Kristi Noem is up to the job. That is not me saying it. That is senators of her own party.
What we've seen is a disaster. Under your leadership, Ms. Noem.
It troubles me. A fifth to a quarter of $1 billion of taxpayer money when we're scratching for every penny and we're fighting over rescission packages. I just can't agree with.
Is now former Congressman Mike Rogers, currently running for Michigan Senate. Good to see you, sir. I think we both agree that we are in a difficult fight right now. The terrorists only have to be right once. The FBI, DHS has to be right every time. Is Noem getting a bad rap?
Well, you know, it's interesting. When I talk to people, they really don't talk about Kristi Noem. They talk about, ICE and DHS and are they doing the job? We've had instances here in Michigan where we've had illegals solicit minors for sex. We've had a murder in the west side of the state by an illegal stabbed a woman to death. We've had burglary crews. We've had every imaginable crime happen here in Michigan. They want to know are those people getting found and deported and out of the country? And
well,
so I think that's
an excellent point. That's part of what the Department of Homeland Security does. I also think in Michigan you guys have imams who are praising Khomeini and holding funerals for him and remembrances for him. So the idea of out of 9/11 came DHS, not only to deal with immigration, but to deal with the threat of domestic terror. Is that what she is capable of doing, of protecting the homeland?
I think the Department of Homeland Security is capable of it. And so I say this as an FBI agent. I worked in Chicago in the first Gulf War. When that happened, I was an organized crime agent. They pulled all of us agents, and we went after sleeper cells, which we know Iran has sleeper cells here in the United States. Now you have a DHS that has a good combination. The problem, here's what the biggest risk is. All of those people, when the Democrats opened up the southern border and just poured people across who we didn't know who they were, we don't know where they're at, and we don't know what their intentions are, that is the biggest concern. And to me, that's the hardest job of DHS, to try to find those people. And it's also hard for the FBI to make sure that they can, A, find people who are identified as sleeper agents, and then do something about those sleeper agents. We did a lot of surveillance.
Something you didn't have to worry about when you were an FBI agent back in the 90s is the radicalization on the internet, which now happens, the ability to communicate back to Iran with Telegram and the like. Speaking of trying to find the worst of the worst, here's Tom Tillis talking to Kristi Noem about just that issue.
Yeah.
Why am I disappointed with Secretary Noem? Because we're not going after enough people who did this damage at the expense of running numbers that Stephen Miller wants out of the White House. We just want numbers. We want 1,000 a day, 6,000 a day, 9,000 a day, because numbers matter, right? No, they don't matter. Quality matters, not quantity, quality.
Is DHS clear-eyed enough on who they need to be going after?
Boy, I think so. I hope so. I think the president's certainly clear-eyed on who he wants to go after. And I think the statistics bear this out. So it's easy to get caught up in the political theater that happens around all this. What is the state of murders in America? Down 20%. Unprecedented, never happened. You know what that tells me? It's not just because police officers are finally getting up off, out of the coffee shops, if you will. It's because we're catching people who are engaged in these activities, drug dealing, human trafficking, murders, gang activity, and getting them out of the country. So that is, to me, the primary driver of, okay, they're doing something right. And I know in today's politics, we don't want to talk about things that are doing right, but I'm telling you, they're doing that right. When you have that kind of drop in murders around the country, that didn't happen just because of every local police department, even though they're at the front lines of all of this. That crime is coming down. So that tells me that something's working. And we ought to celebrate what's working, kind of correct what we think is not working, and then refocus those folks now on trying to find the Chinese folks who are here. By the way, China, big loser in Iran.
No, the Chinese and the Iranians. That's who now needs to be found, without question. Mike Rogers, thanks very much. Running for Senate in Michigan now. We'll see how that goes. First word about this in War Notes, your chance for an inside look at the show every day. Warnotes.com to subscribe. I'll see you on social media at Leland Vittert. Israel keeps killing every leader in Iran, but do they have a plan beyond just creating a vacuum? One of the men planning for it joins us next. Live pictures of Tel Aviv, where residents have spent hours inside bomb shelters after another night of missile attacks from Iran. Sun comes up there in an hour or so. Israel is now fighting a two-front war and might have to invade Lebanon to stop Hezbollah's rocket campaigns. Israel and America, as we have said, can win the war against Iran. The question now for them, as they plan, is if they can win the peace. The Israelis keep bombing every meeting of Iran's new leadership, leaving a power vacuum in the country. Now they have a new target, Khomeini's oldest son, newly elected as his successor. President Trump warned what the worst-case scenario might be.
I guess the worst case would be we do this and then somebody takes over who's as bad as the previous person, right? That could happen. We don't want that to happen.
Joining us now from a shelter in Tel Aviv, former Mossad official Rami Igra. Rami, thank you. We're glad you and the family are safe. President Trump says it's possible that somebody who's worse than the Ayatollah takes over. That's the worst case for the U.S. and for Israel. What's being done to prevent that?
I don't know what's being done, but he is correct in saying so. The Ayatollah, you all have to remember, is not just a leader. The Ayatollah is the Pope for the Shia. He is the top religious official for the Shia. And the minute that he was assassinated, this has started an account between the Shia and the Western world. And we will see ourselves paying as we go along. As you remember, the Shia does believe in shuhada, which is the committing suicide whilst committing other injuries to other people. Now, who can come after Khamenei or this current regime? The guards, the most extreme national guards in Iran are the next in line. And because all of us have to understand that in order to have a revolution in Iran, you need three components that don't exist right now on the ground, which include movement, leadership, and an armed conflict between this movement and the regime. And I don't see this being created in the current Iran. And if it is not created in the current Iran, what we will see if things don't change, we will see worse leadership going into Iran in the future. You want to see examples? Israel assassinated Moussaoui, the head of Hezbollah. And after Moussaoui died, we got Nasrallah, which was a lot worse for us and for the world.
Well, that is a great look back at history, Shia as well, in terms of how they become more and more extreme. The Israelis and Mossad, your former organization, over the past couple of years have managed some extraordinary feats. The pager attacks against Hezbollah in Lebanon come to mind, the ability to have teams on the ground during the 12-day war last year in June that was absolutely extraordinary to begin taking out Iran's air defenses as the Israeli jets came in. Now this intelligence and the ability to take out the Ayatollah, his top 40 people. What are you to believe is available to the Israelis and to the Americans to try and help what would be the moderates or what would be an opposition force, be it the Kurds or anybody else, inside Iran right now?
We have to understand that Iran is a religious country. And even though the moderates or the liberals live in Tehran and we see them, the real majority in Iran doesn't live in Tehran. They live in a country which is as big as Europe. People forget this as well. And in this countryside, these people are religious, and they are the people that have supported this Islamic religious revolution. Now, what is the Mossad's capabilities in Iran? It's very simple. Iran is a very poor country. There are many people in Iran, enough people who don't like the regime. And when you see these two things combined, you understand that it is easy to recruit agents from the other side. But recruiting agents for information or for tactical reasons is completely different than creating a movement. You need to create a movement which is an Iranian movement, and this movement should be led by someone, and Pahlavi is not one of the people that can do it. We all remember that his father came to rule after a revolution in '53 by the Americans and the English, and we all remember that he was a very cruel leader. So if Pahlavi is not the leader,
he's not.
Another leader should be created in Iran, and to do this, you have to start arming Iranian resistant groups, guiding them and working with them for a very long time. You want a great example? A great example is what happened in Syria once the Julani took over.
That's a fair point. Boy, I feel like I could talk to you for another hour. We talk about Hezbollah now trying to fight for their last breath for their existential crisis with the Iranians now on the ropes. Rami Ingra, thank you very much. We'll have you back, sir, hopefully in better times, or at least when you can be above ground.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And something was going on in the shelter right as we wrapped up our interview with Rami. That and the outcome when we come back. Rami Ingra, thank you very much. We'll have you back, sir, hopefully in better times, or at least when you can be above ground.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, look at the dogs playing behind. The dogs are playing behind.
Wait a minute. These are my dogs. Look at them.
Even the dogs come to the shelter. What are their names?
Belle and Daisy. And they love coming here because this is the only place where they can meet their friends.
Belle and Daisy, the star of the shelter. And so many Israelis now have spent days and nights in their shelters. That was right after my interview with Mossad official Rami Ingra. Dogs having some fun inside the shelters in Tel Aviv. Apparently love going to be able to see their friends. And I think, Katie, you know, it's one of those things that either you laugh or you cry. Yeah. And I think what's so amazing is that the Israelis have learned over millennia to laugh. And this is Purim, which is basically Jewish Halloween right now, for those of you who don't celebrate. And there is nothing evidently that can stop a Purim party, including rocket fire. We have some more video from one of the bomb shelters in Tel Aviv. If you don't have a bar, build one in a parking garage. You know, one of the things I learned in my 4 years over there is that infectious love of life. Yes. And the refusal to be defined is phenomenal.
Absolutely. The silver linings of the dogs, and also I think the Nicolas Maduro costume on Purim was a pretty good one given the circumstances. Tel Aviv, of course, is known for its parties. So
I will survive,
able to carry on.
What a motto.
Yes, indeed. Great show, Leland. See you tomorrow. Hello and welcome to Katie Pavlich Tonight. The final polls just closed in Texas in one of the most watched primary elections of the midterms. The judge in Dallas had extended voting there for 2 more hours, and the final results will now come in at any second. We'll update you as the races are called. But a very scary moment at the watch party for Republican Senate candidate Ken Paxton, where a DoorDash driver was arrested with 7 magazines and a bulletproof vest. NewsNation national correspondent Alex Capriarello joins us live from the Paxton watch party in Dallas. Alex, what else do you know about this?
Yeah, Katie, I can tell you that this guy at least posed as a DoorDash driver. We're still awaiting that official confirmation if that's just an alibi, a story that he came up with, or if he really was out there trying to deliver food to this hotel. Either way, it was a really scary moment and clearly something that could have elevated to become something even greater. What we know officially from Dallas PD is that this is an ongoing investigation. That suspect taken in cuffs to one of the local police precincts for further investigation and questioning. But essentially, it was something that all unfolded very, very quickly outside this Ken Paxton event shortly after 5 o'clock today, when all of a sudden we saw a lot of red and blue lights, police sirens coming and essentially grabbing this person. A little unclear exactly how it was unfolding or what really came about, but Dallas PD said it originally was called a suspicious person call after further talking to the guy. Mind you, he was looking rather suspicious with camouflage hat, sunglasses, mask, gloves on, essentially looking like somebody that was out to go out on a hunt. After they further questioned him, took off his mask, started to search his car, that's when they found what looked like an arsenal of ammunition, boxes of ammo, as well as fully loaded magazines. We heard from other eyewitnesses that they also pulled a bulletproof vest out of the car, although that's not something that we saw. And we also did not see an actual gun inside that vehicle. But the man was arrested. His car was towed away, essentially a bad situation, completely taken off the map, and everything goes on here at this Ken Paxton event as scheduled and as planned. No real disturbance right here behind me, as you can see. We're waiting for Ken Paxton to actually take the stage. But as of right now, an ongoing investigation here in Dallas on this very suspicious person that was taken away from this scene. Katie?
Folks look to be carrying on behind you, and we hope that everybody stays safe. It's very scary. Thank you, Alex. We'll check back as the results come in later. Thank you. All right, breaking this evening, the Department of War has identified 4 Army Reserve soldiers killed by Iranian drones while supporting Operation Epic Fury. Sergeant First Class Nicole Amor of Minnesota, Sergeant First Class Noah Tegens of Nebraska, Sergeant Declan Cody of Iowa, and Captain Cody Cork of Florida. They died in Kuwait on March 1st. Tonight, we remember and honor their service, and we think of the loved ones they leave behind. Meanwhile, strikes continue to escalate across the Middle East. America's diplomatic and military outposts again came under fire today while U.S. forces continue hunting down and striking Iranian drones and mobile missile launchers. President Trump noted the progress that's been made towards removing Iran as a military threat earlier today.
They have no Navy. It's been knocked out. They have no Air Force. It's been knocked out. They have no air detection. That's been knocked out. Their radar has been knocked out. And just about everything's been knocked out.
Meanwhile, the oldest son of Ayatollah Khamenei was reportedly selected as the regime's new supreme leader. His name is Mojtaba. He's 56 years old. He's a hardliner, and he's said to be just as evil and barbaric as his father, yet totally unqualified in other areas. But many think his appointment, if true, will be largely ceremonial. For the latest, let's bring in News Nation international correspondent Robert Sherman. Robert, thank you so much for joining us again tonight. So as Epic Fury continues, what are the day's biggest developments at this hour?
Well, hey there, Katie. Well, without question, it's growing more and more treacherous for Americans here in the Middle East. The Ministry of Defense in Qatar says 2 ballistic missiles were fired at their territory. One was shot down. The other made impact at Al Udeid Air Base, our largest base in the region. No casualties were reported there, but it's not just U.S. troops that are coming under fire. It's also diplomatic missions as well. The U.S. consulate in Dubai was struck by an Iranian drone, hitting the parking lot near one of the buildings, sparking flames there. No casualties once again. But it's just the latest of U.S. missions abroad that have come under attacks after the U.S. Embassy in Saudi Arabia and the U.S. Embassy in Kuwait took similar fire from Iran. This is now becoming a growing trend. As a result, you're seeing the U.S. military focusing in on hitting ballistic missile sites that Iran has in their stockpiles, trying to knock out those weapons before they're put in the air, targeting U.S. troops. This is why the State Department is emphasizing to Americans here in the region to leave as quickly as possible as this indiscriminate fire continues from Iran in all directions here. Katie?
Robert, you mentioned the Americans that the president and the entire administration is trying to get home. President Trump said today that more than 9,000 Americans have safely returned from the Middle East, but of course, airspace closures and, the airlines not flying in and out of really any country at this point. You had airports targeted as well by these Iranian drones. What is the guidance from the government and the State Department at this point?
Yeah, at this juncture here, the State Department says they've been in touch with another 1,600 or so Americans who have reached out to them, and they want all Americans here in the region to identify themselves to the State Department. There's a few different tracks here, Katie. For example, where we are in Israel, the best bet, according to the embassy here, is to leave through Egypt and try and catch a flight through Cairo. For those who are in the Emirates right now, they may be sitting tight for a couple of days as the airspace is still closed. There's some limited repatriation flights taking place, but not much air travel at this point. Right now, the State Department is working to get more commercial flights going, charter flights, and other rescue flights in order to get Americans out of the region. But it is a difficult space here, Katie, because, some of these countries like the UAE has seen over 800 drones violating their airspace. It's a very dynamic environment trying to get Americans out.
Yeah, and of course, a lot of those drone targets are civilians, which is a big problem. Robert Sherman, thank you so much for reporting. And of course, be safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Well, while the Trump administration is highlighting its success in Iran, Democrats in Congress are pushing to rein in the president's authority. Tomorrow, the Senate is expected to vote on the War Powers Resolution, which would effectively halt Trump's war against Iran. The resolution would also need to be approved by the House and somehow clear veto-proof majorities in both chambers to actually go into effect. So joining us now to talk about it, Democratic Congressman Adam Smith of Washington, of course, the ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. So great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in tonight. Of course, this news is very important, and there is a lot at stake. Do you plan on voting yes for this War Powers Resolution, and why are you making that decision if so?
I do, and your reporting is correct. The odds of this actually passing are pretty close to zero. It may pass, but the president has the ability to veto it. We'd have to have 2/3 vote. But what I really want is I want the House and the Senate to vote directly on this war. This is, beyond any shadow of a doubt, a war which the Constitution says Congress is supposed to approve. It's the most momentous thing we can do as a country. We are elected representatives of that country. We should be on record, one way or the other, whether or not you support this war.
Secretary of State and, of course, National Security Advisor Marco Rubio broke down the administration's many hats, as we know. He broke down the administration's objectives in Iran today again. Take a listen.
Iran is run by lunatics, religious fanatic lunatics. They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them. The president made the decision to go after them, take away their missiles, take away their navy, take away their drones, take away their ability to make those things so that they can never have a nuclear weapon. That's why the president made this decision. It was the right decision. And the world will be a safer place when these radical clerics no longer have access to these weapons.
So I understand you want Congress on record to take this War Powers vote, but do you agree with the objectives that the president and the Secretary of State have laid out for this war?
I agree with the objectives. I don't agree that the war was the way to achieve them. And that right there was a focus on the nuclear program. We were told 9 months ago that their nuclear program was obliterated, was gone completely. Some of us argued about that at the time, but they said, no, it's gone. And now we've seen no evidence of where it's at. There is no way on earth that was an imminent threat that called for us to engage in this level of war that's already seen 6 dead Americans, countless, conflict has spread throughout the Middle East. All kinds of problems are created by this for a nuclear program that the administration has told us is miles away from being achieved. So no, I don't accept that stopping their nuclear program required this level of military action.
Can you give me a definition of imminent? Because we've heard Democrats using this term a lot to push back on the administration. Yeah. But to be fair, the administration has said they refused to negotiate. They offered them nuclear fuel for life for free. They said no.
I can answer the question.
But let me just give a little more background. And they offered that, and the Iranians said absolutely not. They had talks after the bombings of the nuclear sites. They refused to negotiate in good faith. And they've also tried to assassinate the president. So what does it mean, imminent threat? Do we have to wait until they're screwing a warhead onto a ballistic missile before we actually take it seriously? Or are we allowed to have an offensive war at this point?
Yeah. Imminent means soon, okay? Weeks, days, months. And I want you to understand, yes, Iran had, first of all, they clearly have a ballistic missiles program that they were reconstituting. Again, nobody knows and no one has said where they were at on a nuclear weapons program that had been obliterated 9 months ago. So there is no evidence whatsoever that they were anywhere close to having a nuclear weapon. And to answer your question specifically, within months or even years, there's no evidence that they even made a decision that they were actually going to build a nuclear weapon. But again, this moving all over the place, okay, all right, well, they had a nuclear weapon. Well, that wasn't imminent.
They didn't have one, thank God.
Yeah, well, of course.
Are you opposed to the regime getting a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So how do you, given the amount of talks over the last 30 years about this program, including for Democrats like Hillary Clinton,
I've heard your arguments. I want to make a couple of mine.
Go ahead.
So we had an agreement.
How do you propose this we handle differently? Go ahead.
We good? Okay. 2015, we had an agreement to stop them from building a nuclear weapon. And they took down all of that enrichment, all of that stuff down way below where it had ever been. We tore up that agreement. And then they moved up to 60%. And then we blew that up. okay, I propose that we at least wait until we get a little further down the road before we launch a war in the Middle East that is now involving, what, 14 different countries? Hezbollah and Israel are back at war. You know, they're taking shots at oil. They're taking shots at infrastructure all over the place. So they were not eating where, I mean, how do I know it wasn't imminent? Because President Trump told us it wasn't imminent.
What do you make of the Saudis and the Qataris and the UAE fighting back against Iran because Iran is attacking not just Israel and the United States, but now their neighbors?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't think they have much of a choice. But again, that's another thing that happened in this war. And President Trump himself said he was surprised by that. When we attacked Iran, he was surprised that Iran attacked all of those Gulf states. He shouldn't have been surprised. And now those Gulf states have been dragged into war. This is the largest war we've seen in the Middle East since 1967. So imminent means a heck of a lot more imminent than it was to launch this type of war with this much unpredictability behind it.
You mentioned the JCPOA. That was a deal that did not address the ballistic missile program.
Correct.
As Secretary Rubio talked about today.
We were talking about nukes when you raised that. That's the whole thing.
Let me just make this point, and then I'll let you respond. So Rubio has made this point also in 2015 while the deal was being negotiated. He made this point today and yesterday when he was on Capitol Hill. He said the ballistic missile program is the program that protects their nuclear ambitions. So if they have thousands of missiles they can use, it protects the program from ever being obliterated.
It protects their regime.
And it protects them from building a nuclear program. So what do you say about the idea of taking out ballistic missiles so they can't protect building a bomb?
First of all, the nuclear program has existed for 20 years, okay? And they haven't yet crossed that line to building it. Now, that's a threat, and we absolutely need to deal with that threat.
How?
The ballistic missile program is, well, how is, right now, they're not going towards it, so let's not start a war with 14 different countries as to stop something that had supposedly already been stopped 9 months ago. But you asked about the ballistic missile program. The ballistic missiles are a huge problem, but they weren't going to attack. There was no evidence whatsoever. They were building up those missiles to be in a position to do that. Is it really your position that the only way to deal with a country that has weapons programs is to go to war?
No,
That's
sir.
it? That's
no,
all we've
sir.
got on the
I'd
table?
love to have you back to talk about that. But the idea that Iran has not been using their missiles is ridiculous, especially given all the proxy groups that they've armed, including Hezbollah and Hamas in the region, not to mention South America.
That's the third problem that we haven't talked about yet, which is their support for proxy forces and terrorism. Absolutely. But they actually haven't, except in response to attacks, been using their ballistic missile
program. So you're saying Iran is a victim, not the aggressor, and using
the missile program? Why do you put words in my mouth that I very clearly didn't say? Absolutely not. Iran has destabilized the region across the board. Is a full-scale Middle East war the best way to address that? That drags in all
it seems like talking hasn't really worked over the last 30 years.
Well, it has stopped.
And Democrats and Republicans have also said they can't have a nuke.
Yeah, and they don't, and haven't, okay?
Well on their way.
So a full-scale Middle East war also
where everyone's alliance against Iran?
Okay, but where everyone's got missiles, lobbing into their hotels and their oil infrastructure and their civilian, right?
Which they've done forever.
No, they haven't done that forever.
Yes, they have.
They've been shooting missiles. They've been shooting missiles at Saudi Arabia forever.
Yes, they have. They've been targeting.
Forever.
The Houthis have been targeting civilian airports in Saudi.
Different thing.
They've targeted a number of civilian airports in the UAE. This is absolutely happening. We have to go, but I'd love to have you back to talk for this because obviously it's not going away. We'll watch and see how.
Yeah, the war is going to be around for a long time.
Yes, it will. Congressman Adam Smith, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Appreciate the chance.
All right, thanks for joining us tonight. I appreciate that. Well, there has been a lot of discussion about the Trump administration's messaging on the mission in Iran. Here is one major detail that we are just now hearing about in the negotiations with Iran leading up to this war.
Both the Iranian negotiators said to us directly, with no shame, that they controlled 460 kilograms of 60%. And they're aware that that could make 11 nuclear bombs, and that was the beginning of their negotiating stance.
Joining us now, Rebecca Heinrichs, Hudson Institute Senior Fellow and Keystone Defense Initiative Director, and Shirin Nariman, former political prisoner in Iran and human rights advocate. Thank you so much for being here tonight. So, Shirin, as a former political prisoner in Iran, what do you make of President Trump's war, and what are you hoping for the regime as we move forward?
Well, what we have seen, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. what we have seen all for past 47 years, that this regime has been always suppressing people. And I think more than any time during the January was when the whole world realized that how brutal this regime can be and how much, this regime can kill. So I think the war is not in my hand or any of our hands, but I think it has now we can see hope for the regime change by the Iranian people. As you know, National Council of Resistance of Iran, which is led by a woman, Madam Rajavi, has a 10-point plan and has an organized movement inside of Iran who would be fighting the fight with this regime, because this regime is not going to fall by the attack. It needs movements. It needs boots on the ground. Iranian people would fight for their freedom and liberty. And that's when it is necessary to have the organized resistance movement inside of Iran, which our organization enjoys from that.
Yeah, we're seeing some reports today that the Kurds have been essentially being prepared to be armed for at least a year. So we're potentially going to see some movement on that front in the coming days and weeks. Rebecca, why is it the first time that we're hearing that Iran was bragging about being able to make 11 nuclear bombs? I understand that negotiations are sensitive. A lot of this happened behind closed doors. But after the bombing of the nuclear sites last summer, the regime was still out in front bragging about that they would never, ever give up enrichment. And yet now we hear that they had the potential to build 11 bombs within weeks. Do you think the Trump administration should have said that? Or did they negotiate in a strategy that's working for them?
No, I think that Special Envoy Witkoff is now explaining why the Trump administration made the decision to use military force at this time. This indication that the Iranians were essentially saying, we're entitled to this kind of enrichment, we're very defiant, we're not really willing to negotiate in good faith, and this is how much nuclear material we have, and we're going to move forward with this. So I think that Witkoff is essentially just informing the American people as to how defiant and unreasonable the regime was. The other thing I want to point out, Katie, the ranking member Smith was just talking about how there was an Iran deal in place and that was working. It was not working. That's why President Trump pulled the United States out of the Iran deal. That deal was so bad, negotiated by Obama. It didn't include ballistic missiles, didn't have anywhere, anytime inspection so that we knew what they were doing, never got to the bottom of possible military dimensions, so we didn't know the degree to which the program had matured. And it had sunsets. And so at certain times, the requirements of the JCPOA would sunset and there would be sanctions relief, which would fund the regime. The last piece I'll say is the ballistic missiles are so important. Secretary Rubio is so right, because the ballistic missiles go hand in glove with nuclear weapons. They deliver them. So this administration is absolutely right that this regime was totally defiant. We'd given it plenty time, and now was the moment to move, not to wait till the regime was more powerful, but to, at a lower risk to the American people and our troops in the region, to go in and carry out this military.
Yeah, not to mention the Obama-Iran nuclear deal did nothing to address terrorism proxies in the region and around the world, which of course also act as protection for the regime, and they've been taken out, which is why the Iranian regime is so weak at this point. But Shirin, the son of Ayatollah Khamenei has reportedly been elected as Iran's next supreme leader. How does that impact the country? Do you think he can keep control, or do you think that he'll be next on their way out if the Israelis find out where he is?
Well, I think the death of Khamenei was the end of an era. And I think no matter who wants to become the next Velayat Faqih, the supreme leader, whether it's son or anyone else, I think the whole thing is done. The regime is much weaker than can anyone anticipate. But it goes back to having an organized movement, having the opposition that has a great plan for the future and knows what it takes to downfall this regime. And the only resistance oppositions that I see is National Council of Resistance, because they have been fighting for past 47 years. And for past 47 years, we have been saying that this regime, you cannot change the behavior of this regime. This regime is not only bad for us, it's bad for the whole world. And now this is what we are getting at. And I think only Madam Rajavi is the only one that has a clear plan, clear path and also what it needs and what it takes for the regime change, which is the opposition, the resistance, organized resistance inside of Iran.
Yeah, well, the stakes are high, and the administration is certainly watching to see who the next leaders are and whether they're appropriate for the current time. Rebecca and Sharon, thank you so much for your time and expertise. We will bring you back as the story develops. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, we just got 2 race results out of Texas. Decision Desk HQ projects Greg Abbott to win the Republican primary in the Texas governor's race. Decision Desk HQ projects Dan Patrick to win the Republican primary in Texas and in the Texas lieutenant governor's race, and we'll continue to update you as more races are called. And also tonight, we're honoring our troops, and we're also honoring their families. The mother of an Iraq war veteran joins us next to share how she's giving back to the heroes fighting the war against Iran. Stay with us. Well, families of service members fighting overseas and deployed to the Middle East are anxiously awaiting news of their loved ones. Some go to extended periods of time without a phone call. What are the real effects of war? Many of us see it on the news, but families feel it firsthand. The nonprofit Military Moms and Wives of Brazoria County says it has seen an increase in calls from worried parents and spouses since the latest military strikes in Iran. The organization provides support for families at home, as well as the work they do shipping care packages to those deployed. Their founder has been doing this for 2 decades. Mary Moreno joins us now. Mary, thank you so much for joining us tonight. So great to see you. Just to start, you've been doing this for 20 years. What advice do you have to other parents whose children might be deployed for the first time or for the 10th time right now as things continue in Iran?
Thank you, Katie, for having me here tonight. I've been doing this for 23 years. I've had parents call me, especially moms, have been calling me and just saying, how do I handle this? Well, you know what? 23 years ago, my young son was deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom. And all I can tell them is just listen. Don't ask questions. Don't ask questions. And don't let them hear the fear, because you want them to concentrate on the mission that they're out to do. It's not going to do them any good if they're worrying about you. And the best thing that you can do is just give it to God and pray for them to return safely home.
Yeah, that's a good advice. Give it to God and pray for them, because worrying is something that doesn't really help much, although it's totally understandable, especially in circumstances like this. Tell us about the work that your group does and why you decided to found it.
You know, like I mentioned earlier, 23 years ago, my young son decided to join the Marines. My husband said to my young son, Kenny, we can't even get you to mow the yard and you're going to join the Marines. And he said, Mom, Dad, I'll show you. And off to war he went. And, you know, as a parent, almost for 6 months, I had no clue where my son was. And, you know, I had an emotional breakdown and I was hospitalized for about 45 days. And after I came out, you know, I decided that there had to be other families like me. I come from a very small community, a very patriotic community. And I reached out to our local newspaper. They did a story. They came, the newspaper came out on a Sunday. That Sunday, I had 6 phone calls. 6 moms called me. Little did I know what mission I was going to be on, the journey that I was going to be on. And here I am today, 23 years later, and still going strong.
Well, we are so grateful for you and the work that you're doing for our soldiers and Marines, of course, deployed overseas, and we will be watching your work. Mary, thank you so much for joining us tonight and giving advice to anxious parents whose children are deployed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, now we have some breaking news. Now back to Texas, where we have election results in tonight's critical primary races. Joining us now is NewsNation's Alex Capriello, who is in Dallas, Texas. Go ahead, tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I'm at the Paxton event right now, and I got to tell you, it does not seem as if this recent news or this Decision Desk HQ call for an upcoming runoff election has essentially made it out to this crowd yet. So I'll share it with you right now. We just saw those polling numbers with Cornyn having that slight edge over Ken Paxton, 43.2 for Cornyn, 40.3 for Ken Paxton. You'll see that check mark by both of their names, which essentially means that they're going to have to do this all over again with a special runoff election in about 2.5 months from now, May 26th. And the reason why is here in Texas, you need to at least earn 50% of the vote. 50.1%, in fact, would be enough to do it. But if neither candidate fails to earn that 50% vote, well, then that is the reason that we have to have this special election come May. Wesley Hunt will not be a part of that mix. You can see he earned a non-insignificant number, nearly 13% of the vote today. And so that's the reason why Ken Paxton or John Cornyn were able to earn that 50%. So now the big question will be, where do the voters who went for Wesley Hunt go? Will they go with Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General, or will they go with the tried and true Senator John Cornyn, who is now seeking his 5th re-election? He's been here for a long time in Texas. A lot of people respect him. They see him as an establishment Republican, but at the very same time, they don't see him aligning like Ken Paxton does with MAGA and with President Trump. That's a lot of the reason why a lot of voters actually end up drifting over towards the Ken Paxton side. So we're going to wait and see if Paxton eventually does come out here, and I'll let you know what he says. Katie?
Okay, well, it's one of the hottest primary races in the country and a preview to maybe the midterm elections. And we'll come back to you later, of course, for the Democrats as well, who have some contested primaries. Thank you, Alex. All right, switching gears, here is a question. Why is Governor Abigail Spanberger protecting an illegal immigrant murder suspect instead of the Virginia mother he's accused of murdering? We'll debate it next. Welcome back. Well, in one of her first duties as governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger blocked state troopers and the Department of Corrections from cooperating with ICE. Now, after an illegal immigrant from West Africa was arrested for allegedly stabbing a Fairfax County woman to death last month at a bus stop, Spanberger is making it harder to get criminals like this deported. The governor's office told DHS to request a signed judicial warrant in this case. So why is she protecting an illegal alien who's been arrested more than 30 times instead of seeking justice for the Virginia mother he's accused of murdering? Joining me now is Jesse Weber, host of Jesse Weber Live, and Scott Schuchart, former assistant director for regulatory affairs and policies for ICE. Thank you both for being here. So Jesse, let's start with you. What exactly is a judicial warrant? What is that she's asking for?
Well, I'll tell you, it's not necessary here. So a judicial warrant is a warrant that is signed off for a judge. Typically in ICE situations, you would need it if you were entering somebody's home, right, a private residence. There's an expectation of privacy. You see that in a number of criminal cases when there's probable cause that a crime was committed. The reason that ICE doesn't need it is all they really need is an administrative warrant that is signed off by staff, probable cause that someone can be deported. And here I will tell you, as a matter of law, yes, Spanberger can refuse an ICE detainer, right, a request that is sent to local law enforcement. I know somebody's in your custody. We believe they should be removed. She can deny it. The problem is that creates so many complications, and I will tell you, if the allegations are true and he's charged with murder and he has a criminal history, if there should be any reason that he's released, that creates a dangerous scenario because you would rather have that person detained in a controlled, safe setting rather than them being released, and you have to locate them and expend the resources to do so as well.
Yeah, Scott, just based on your experience, do you think this is a requirement that should be complied with, or is this just an extra step that makes streets more dangerous when there are criminals like this with long rap sheets running around and not in federal custody?
Well, in this case, I think it's right that legally ICE doesn't have to get the warrant. It also would take them about 20 minutes to get the warrant. And so they're trying to pick a political fight here rather than work to cooperate with jurisdictions that have concerns about the way they cooperate with an agency that walks around and shoots American citizens in the face. But it's true in this case that the governor's expectation of a judicial warrant is not the way the system requires things to go forward.
Just a follow-up on that. Democrats have argued, and Spanberger, when she signed as one of her first executive orders to stop cooperating with ICE, that they were doing it because they thought that not the worst of the worst were being deported. But here we are with this situation. There was another one in December where a man from El Salvador, MS-13 member, was let out of custody, and he went the next day and murdered another man out in Reston, Virginia. So why even pull the cooperation in the first place?
Well, that's how rules work. You don't just make up different rules for egregious cases. And she wants to have a relationship between ICE and the state law enforcement agencies on certain terms. So the local law enforcement agencies in Virginia still have a lot of latitude, as I understand it, to work out their own level of cooperation with ICE.
Jesse, just your response to having an extra step instead of just making sure that they can deal with this problem.
Well, I just want to circle back to why we have these ICE detainers, right? We usually have them, particularly in cases of violent criminals. And by the way, I know that he was arrested 30 times. I don't know his conviction record. But again, the allegations are quite serious. You are able, this is more of a request. It's a courtesy. It's somebody within your custody for 48 hours so that if you want to detain them for potential deportation, you know where they are. It's a controlled setting. If they are released, and by the way, I mean, if he's charged with murder, the likelihood that he's going to be released, probably slim, but hey, maybe there's a problem in this criminal case and ultimately does get released. Then not only do you have to expend the resources and the time to try to find him, you know how dangerous that is? You have somebody that you have to find on the outside to detain. That's the problem. That's why, in the end, what you want is cooperation between federal authorities and local and state authorities as much as possible, because this could create a danger for the public.
Yeah, Scott, just to follow up on what you said about the governor wanting rules, I understand that argument. But at the same time, as a result of that, when there was more cooperation before she came into office, now we have this situation where this illegal alien with a rap sheet stabbed to death this woman at a bus stop. So it does create the opportunity for victims to be victimized in ways that are completely detrimental and irreversible. So is it really worth it?
No, it's a real shame that ICE isn't prioritizing going after violent criminals in jails and is instead picking up a larger and larger share of non-criminal people off the street. I agree that that's what they should be focused on.
All right. Well, Jesse and Scott, thank you so much for your expertise tonight. We'll follow it. Thank you.
You got it. Good seeing you.
Thank you.
All right, now to this. Iranians are celebrating in the streets around the world over the takedown of the regime, but woke voices on social media are raining on their parade. Some of the videos we've seen are disgusting. We'll show you up next.
And literally, if you have any part to play in the American military industrial complex, literally you.
Well, from jubilant tears to extreme anti-Israel and anti-American meltdowns, social media responses to the actions in Iran have been intense.
And literally, if you have any part to play in the American military industrial complex, literally you. I hope you never make it home. I'm so serious.
Here's another video claiming our presence in Iran is worse than Iraq. Take a look.
Hello from barely holding it together as the United States invades yet another country in the Middle East. The thing that got me into anti-war and social justice work in the first place was the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And somehow this is so much worse.
But what are Iranians actually saying about this?
I want to conclude this editorial with this message to the late Supreme Leader. پدر سگ خاک به سرت بسوز تو جهنم.
That was Rita Panahi of Sky News Australia, who has been a vocal critic of the Iranian regime since her family fled as a child. And what you're seeing right now is video of Iranian Americans celebrating in the streets. Joining us now, Robbie Starbuck of the Robbie Starbuck podcast and Democratic strategist and former advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton, Richard Goodstein. So, Richard,
yes.
What in the world is going on with these American women? I understand not wanting to invade, but the idea that Iranian women are celebrating and they're having a meltdown, what's the disconnect here?
Let me just say one thing for 10 seconds. I think your viewers need to know that in the politics tonight, in North Carolina and Texas, worst possible outcome for Republicans, best possible outcome for Democrats. We can talk about it. I know that's not what the segment is about.
We'll bring you back. Once we get the full results,
Listen,
we'll bring you back.
What I thought you were going to show was Tucker Carlson saying, let me get this quote now, that the invasion was absolutely disgusting and evil. Or Megyn Kelly, who blamed it on three prominent Jews, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, and Miriam Adelson. Or Candace Owens, who's talked about Bibi Netanyahu pulling Trump around by the nose. I thought, frankly, they have a lot more followers than those TikTok people that you dug up. So honestly, I wouldn't ascribe too much to those women. And I think, frankly, you probably want to talk to the Tuckers and the Candaces and the Megans
I think there's plenty of people talking to them about how they're wrong, including the President of the United States. But, Robbie, Iranian women, of course, under the regime have faced restrictions on traveling, employment, how they dress, whether, what kind of education that they get. This was not the case before the Islamic Revolution in the 1970s. Why do you think that there's this disconnect between women in America who think they know it all versus those abroad who actually don't have freedoms like we do here?
Yeah, I just want to point out that you actually didn't say those women were Democrats. You played a couple of videos of crazy ladies, and he immediately knew they were his people. So
no, not at all.
I just want to point that out. But I don't think he could have been more transparent coming out here first 10 seconds when we're talking about a war where we have, lives at stake. And you're more worried about races and congressional primaries tonight. I think it's ridiculous, but it's par for the course. My family came from a communist oppressive regime in Cuba, and I often find that overprivileged people, especially in the Democratic Party, tend to have a disconnect with people who actually have real problems, because the Democratic Party is one that's filled with inventing problems that don't actually exist because their lives have been incredibly stable, honestly. And because they've had such good lives, they have trouble connecting with people who actually have hard problems.
Yeah, Richard, Democrats claim to be the side of the political aisle that are all about women's rights. And yet here we have a situation where American Iranians are talking about how they're super excited about this because finally 50 years of oppression and murder of women in the streets for daring to show their hair. And yet Democrats seem to be opposed to it, viscerally opposed to it.
Yeah. Robbie's talking about his heritage. My grandparents came from Ukraine. I'm not happy about the fact that Trump's siding with Russia, if you want to kind of get to that level. As far as these women are concerned,
we're literally funding Ukraine. We're funding Ukraine. What are you talking about?
He's blaming Ukraine. Yeah, but I'm just saying, Robbie's talking about his heritage, if we want to kind of play it both ways. Look, the fact of the matter is Democrats have stood up for women's rights indisputably. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Not right now.
Well, the fact of the matter is, everybody was dancing in the streets after shock and awe in Iraq. Everybody was dancing in the streets after, we took out Gaddafi in Libya. And look how those two went. So let's talk again in, I don't know, a month or 6 months and see how this is going. But yes, hats off to these women. They should be celebrating the fact that the Ayatollah is long gone. That's a great day. But let's have a plan. So far, we're hearing every cockamamie excuse under the sun and nothing that purports to be what it's going to look like when there's, in fact, a new regime. How's that going to happen?
All right, Robbie, final word to you.
There's a lot there, because I'm pretty sure he would be totally fine with us going to war under Hillary Clinton or, God forbid, a Jasmine Crockett or AOC presidency one day. And that's because of his Ukrainian heritage. See, I see oppressive regimes falling as a good thing. But in terms of a plan, yeah, the American people, rightfully, we are a little hesitant about wars after Afghanistan and Iraq. But we can't let that prevent us from ever taking action. We can't let it paralyze us from being able to take care of real problems. And as we saw in Venezuela, it is possible to do things, to do hard things and do them quickly and topple regimes without staying there for decades.
Yeah,
so
if you fight wars to win,
that's what we can
then
do
that,
here.
of course, helps too. If you fight wars to win and you fight them quickly with an objective, which they have, that's the way to do it, not to drag it out over the course of 20+ years. Robbie and Richard, thank you so much for being here. Great to see you.
Take care, Katie.
Thank you.
All right, mind if I use your headphones? One airline is taking on a behavior that truly enrages my producers and myself here on Katie Pavlich Tonight. Stay tuned. Well, it might get infinitely more pleasant to fly United Airlines, because now each passenger listening to music, watching a video, or doom scrolling on social media now must, thank goodness, wear headphones. And if you don't, they reserve the right to ban you from flying on United forever. Joining me now again, Jesse Weber. About time. Like, all the airlines got to do this.
It's amazing.
Way overdue.
I have a personal story. Someone was watching a movie that I hadn't seen yet, full volume, ruined the entire ending. It was Conclave. Conclave, not great. I didn't love the movie in the end, but again, he ruined it for me, and I'm so happy. Everybody's got to do some
The
of
end of
these.
that movie is the whole movie, too. So
Yeah, I know. That's the whole point. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, bring your headphones to the airport, and if you don't have them, turn down the volume. That does it for us. Jesse, take it away.
You got it. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Jesse Weber Live. It is day 4 since the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, attacking Iran and effectively taking out their supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Today, Iran renewed its retaliation campaign across U.S. allies across the Middle East, firing off more than 400 ballistic missiles and nearly 1,000 drones at targets, including the U.S. consulate in Dubai. Now, this is in response to strikes that targeted Iranian leadership responsible for electing their next supreme leader. That was a major event. Now, meanwhile, the State Department is urging Americans in 14 Middle Eastern countries to get out, all as we learn the names of 4 of the 6 United States troops who have made the ultimate sacrifice. Captain Cody Cork of Florida, Sergeant First Class Noah Hitchens of Nebraska, Sergeant First Class Nicole Amora of Minnesota, and Sergeant Declan Cody of Iowa. NewsNation's Robert Sherman is going to join me in just a minute. He's live in Tel Aviv with the latest on the ground, but also talking about the latest on the hunt for 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie. We're still on top of this story. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nano said today authorities are, quote, definitely closer to finding the suspect or suspects. But as the search enters its 2nd month, what leads him to believe that exactly? Brian Enton, live from Tucson with the very latest. And by the way, acclaimed forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan, friend of mine, friend of the show, has his own theory of what may have happened that we may not be thinking of. I'm going to ask him about that in a little bit. Plus, covering it all night, Americans in Texas, North Carolina, and Arkansas headed to the polls today, kicking off the 2026 primary elections. 2 competing Senate primaries have all eyes on Texas tonight in races that could have major impacts on the midterms. We're going to talk about that. We're going to keep a close eye on that throughout the hour as well, talk about what's at stake. But we're going to start with what has turned into a full-blown conflict quickly spreading across the Middle East after the United States and Israel jointly attacked Iran on the morning of February 28th. Now, 4 days later, the objective of Operation Epic Fury remains a bit murky and seemingly different depending on who you ask. But it was earlier today when Secretary of State Marco Rubio laid out in perhaps the clearest way that we've heard so far what he says the president's intention is.
Iran is run by lunatics, religious fanatic lunatics. They have an ambition to have nuclear weapons. They intend to develop those nuclear weapons behind a program of missiles and drones and terrorism that the world will not be able to touch them for fear of those things. And this is the weakest they've ever been. Now is the time to go after them. The president made the decision to go after them, take away their missiles, take away their navy, take away their drones, take away their ability to make those things so that they can never have a nuclear weapon. That's why the president made this decision.
The thing is, every time you turn around, that answer from the administration seems to be a little bit different. Now, regardless, the operation remained in full force today with new strikes targeting Iranian leadership, reportedly as they were meeting to select a new supreme leader. And President Trump said that the joint U.S.-Israeli strikes have, quote, knocked out most of Iran's military operations. The strikes on Iranian leadership didn't prevent them from reportedly selecting the son of Ayatollah Khamenei. We're talking about Mujtaba Khamenei as his successor. However, I will tell you, NewsNation has not yet independently confirmed that. So again, that's something we're keeping a very careful eye on. But those strikes did escalate Iranian retaliatory actions across the region. The U.S. consulate in Dubai was the target of an Iranian drone strike. The U.S. embassy in Saudi Arabia, too, the largest U.S. airbase in Qatar, was struck by Iranian ballistic missiles. Israel has also received a barrage of attacks today. And by the way, that includes Palestinian authorities that have been hit by Iranian missiles as well. Now, as this war escalates, the State Department is now making it a top priority to evacuate Americans from 14 countries in the region. And by the way, Congress is set to vote on that bipartisan war powers resolution tomorrow that we talked about on the show last night. This is meant to legally limit the president's ability to continue military operations without congressional approval, but you do have to wonder if it'll even matter if it passes, as they would eventually need 2/3 majority to override a Trump veto. Now, with all that in mind, I want to bring in NewsNation international correspondent Robert Sherman, who's live in Tel Aviv. Robert, always good to see you. So I have 2 parts to this. I want to start with the latest rounds of these retaliatory attacks by Iran. A, how effective have they been? And B, who exactly is ordering them at this point?
Yeah, those are good questions here, Jesse. In terms of where exactly these strikes have been going, I mean, you've seen them going in every different direction. Drones and missiles. That's why officials are calling them indiscriminate. Whether it was in Qatar, in which you saw Al Udeid Air Base getting struck, which is our largest base in the region. There were no casualties there. You've seen them going after consulates in Dubai, embassies in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. So there's a diplomatic element to this as well. But then, of course, there are those drones that you've seen that have slammed into hotels or slammed into residential or commercial areas. So that is why there's this whole chaotic element here. In terms of the efficacy, the majority of these missiles and drones are being shot down. But of course, there are those that get through. And those that get through can deliver a significant punch. Exhibit A are the 6 U.S. service members who have lost their lives, or the 9 people who lost their lives just outside of Jerusalem this weekend. So these missiles do have a high level of efficacy. In terms of who is giving the orders, this is interesting. Iran contends that many of their units operate independently with pre-given orders, meaning that there's nobody who is really calling the shots right now. They have pre-given orders. They're operating on their own terms in many of these military units, and that's what makes them so difficult in order to handle. It's like a group of different entities that are all operating in different directions.
I really appreciate you mentioned that, because I've gotten a #1 question. Well, if you take out the supreme leader, what else is there? Wouldn't the operation fall apart? The way the Iranian constitution is set up, they've actually decentralized and distributed the power. So you have the president, right, you have the judiciary, parliament, the guardian council, although the supreme leader was at the top. I want to ask you about the president's comments. President Trump said most of Iran's military installations have been knocked out. What have you learned about those attacks inside Tehran?
Yeah, I mean, without question, I mean, you've seen some of it in the open space, whether it's all the naval ships that have been sunk or whether it is just the pounding that has taken place in Tehran. The big focus is going to be on ballistic missile sites and their stockpiles, because those provide, without question, the most imminent threat to Americans around the region. Those are what have certainly made the skies above the Middle East so dangerous and have put U.S. service members in harm's way. So that is where the focus is going to be, and drones before they're launched. You even heard the Secretary of State talking about trying to take out these weapons before they're put in the air as a more of a preemptive measure. So without question, that is going to be the central focus here of U.S. operations.
And by the way, we're going to focus on drones later on in the show a little bit. I want to go back to the State Department trying to get Americans out of the region, out of 14 countries. Do you know how they're trying to do that?
Well, it's a mixed bag, depending on which country you're talking about. So, I mean, for example, where we are in Israel right now, the airspace is closed. So the guidance that the embassy in Jerusalem is giving is go out through Egypt. That's not necessarily an option, depending on some of the other countries that you're looking at here. There was a break in that Jordan will be reopening their airspace, so that will alleviate some pressure. I would say the big one right now is going to be the UAE to watch. Obviously, with a large international airport there, which has taken the brunt of missile and drone incursions right now. At this juncture, the State Department is trying to charter flights, get emergency flights, and get Americans out that way, because some of these airspaces could be closed for some time. The big thing is that for every American that is in the region, they want them to identify themselves to the State Department so they know who is here. They say right now there's about 1,600 people or so that have reached out to them that they still have yet to get out.
It must be terrifying for them. You know, we put up that map. You mentioned other countries. Real quick, we've about 45 seconds, Lebanon. You have these Iranian-backed Hezbollah. It's fired rockets into Israel from Lebanon for a second day. Is Israel, I don't know, the United States, are they fighting this now on two fronts?
Without question. I mean, what we've seen here, the rocket incursions, the missile incursions, even Israel has framed this as fighting a two-front war. The IDF even said they had troops operating in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, in order to knock out Hezbollah positions. The airstrikes that are ongoing in the suburbs of Beirut, historic Hezbollah strongholds, without question. I mean, you are seeing this going in two different fronts.
My gosh, chaotic situation. Robert Sherman, thank you so much, and stay safe out there. We really, really appreciate it. Excellent reporting, as always. All right. Now we want to switch over to some other big headlines coming out of Washington today. So first, got very heated on Capitol Hill today. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was grilled by both parties at a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing over how her department is carrying out President Trump's massive immigration enforcement campaign. Lawmakers pressed her on aggressive raid tactics, a multi-million-dollar ad campaign promoting deportations, her use of government aircraft, and they confronted her about the fatal shootings, of course, of 2 U.S. citizens in Minnesota, Renee Good, Alex Preddy. This was during federal immigration operations. And yet Republican Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina just unload, delivering a near 10-minute tirade, accusing Noem of prioritizing arrest numbers over targeted enforcement. Take a listen.
Why am I disappointed with Secretary Noem? Because we're not going after enough people who did this damage at the expense of running numbers that Stephen Miller wants out of the White House. We just want numbers. We want 1,000 a day, 6,000 a day, 9,000 a day, because numbers matter, right? No, they don't matter. Quality matters, not quantity, quality.
And as I mentioned, there's also this concern about getting Americans who are stranded in the Middle East back home. I talked about that with Robert Sherman. We got the primaries that are happening out in North Carolina, Texas, and Arkansas. So I want to bring in right now News Nation White House correspondent Libby Dean for more on this. Libby, good to see you. I want to actually, there he goes. Now I get to see Libby. Hi, Libby. I want to start with Secretary Noem. Obviously, we talked about how she was grilled. She was asked a lot of key questions. What were her defenses? What were some of the ways she tried to explain the actions of ICE and DHS under her purview?
A lot of that defense, Jesse, that we saw came when she was asked about Minnesota. And of course, that was at really the heart of this hearing and why she was testifying on Capitol Hill. She was asked about those comments where she was suggesting that Alex Preddy was a domestic terrorist. What she did, her defense in that, because you asked specifically about that, Jesse, she actually threw agents who were on the ground there in Minnesota under the bus, saying that they provided her with that information, and that's why she said it. So that is one defense. Also, we heard this bipartisan criticism, Democrats, Republicans, today about this $200 million ad buy, which Senator Kennedy, of course a Republican, accused Secretary Noem of using this ad buy as self-promotion. And that was something, of course, that Kristi Noem pushed back against, saying that it led to more deportations. But all of this happening, Jesse, while Secretary Noem's department is shut down right now. And that was actually a defense she used multiple times as well, bringing up the fact that her department is shut down right now.
Yeah, it's something we seem to forget in the chaos of what's happening in the Middle East. I guess the question is, what could this potentially lead to, right? You had Tillis and you had Cory Booker ask her to resign. There, again, bipartisan kind of criticism of Kristi Noem. Is that a possibility?
I will never say never on this, but I would doubt it, at least at this point, Jesse. But that actually isn't the first time that Tillis has told Kristi Noem to resign. We've heard him say that before, but this was really the most heated interaction during that hearing, and you played some of that as well. But a key thing to point out here is the fact that Tom Tillis, he isn't running for re-election. So it's really not shocking to see him go after these Trump administration officials. That's not just Secretary Noem that he's gone after in the last couple of months here. But as I mentioned, likely not to lead to any resignation from Noem, at least right now, because what we've seen from President Trump as Noem continues to face criticism, not only on Capitol Hill, but within the White House, because we know these two have been sitting down behind closed doors, having these long conversations. Right now, President Trump continues to stand behind her. We'll see what comes of that, though, Jesse.
Libby, before I let you go, I want to circle back to what I was talking about with Robert Sherman. What is the White House saying about the Americans that are stuck right now in the Middle East and can't get out? Was this just not well planned out? They had to take immediate action and couldn't immediately think about what to do with the Americans abroad, or do they have a plan right now of trying to get them out?
Well, it seems now they're trying to formulate that plan. I mean, there's no question that the State Department, Jesse, has pretty much been left scrambling here to get out those 1,600 Americans is the number that we just learned. 1,600 Americans to get them out of the region right now. And they created this actually interagency task force. This was something that we learned today that's operating 24/7. But the big thing about all of this is right now, Jesse, we don't actually know when that flight is going to take place. And that is the big question for Americans, the 1,600 on the ground who are wanting to get out. But we've seen this full frontal from the Trump administration saying, okay, these are the numbers to call once we're able to get potentially any Americans out. But right now, obviously, the airspace is closed, as Robert was laying out there, and that is a big concern.
Yeah, like I said, terrifying situation for them, definitely thinking about them and hoping for their safe return back here in the States. Libby Dean, great seeing you. Thanks so much as always.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, up next. While the United States is at war, it is election night in 3 states, the first primaries of the 2026 season, and the eyes of the nation are on the Texas Senate races. What could tonight's results tell us about the midterms and the balance of power? All the breaking election news we're going to have for you. Plus, we're going to be joined by 2 candidates currently running for office. Former U.S. Senator Scott Brown and former Congressman Ben McAdams. They're going to be here next. Stay with us. Well, it is the first primary night of the critical 2026 election season. Voters casting their ballots in 3 states today, Texas, North Carolina, and Arkansas. Key Senate races in Texas, both Republican and Democratic, could have national implications. Also kind of give us an idea of what voters are thinking 1 year into President Trump's second term. In the hotly contested race for the Democratic nomination, it is U.S. Representative Jasmine Crockett against State Representative James Tallarico. We're still waiting for the results in that race, and it may be a while, but we'll let you know if something changes. There's also a lot of controversy over poll closing times in Dallas County, leading to possible vote count delays. But again, be sure to keep an eye on the bottom of the screen right there for the latest on the vote count throughout the night. And by the way, I'll tell you, a short time ago, a call in the race between Republican incumbent Senator John Cornyn and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton. They are going to advance to a runoff in the Texas Republican Senate primary in May. Out in North Carolina, Democrats hoping to flip Senator Thom Tillis' seat in the fall. And tonight, former North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper clinching the Democratic nomination. Former Republican National Committee Chair Michael Whatley winning the Republican Senate nod, too. And right now, some Texas results are still coming in. And while the votes are being counted, we're going to talk with 2 very special guests, 2 candidates currently running for national office. Former Republican U.S. Senator from Massachusetts, Scott Brown, and former Democratic Congressman from Utah, Ben McAdams. We're going to start with Senator Brown, who's now running for U.S. Senate for New Hampshire. He's going to try to run for every state. So I'm going to ask him about his election in a minute. But so good to see you, sir. Thanks for taking the time. Okay, I want to ask you about Texas with this idea of now the runoff election. You know, Paxton, Cornyn, was this expected? And I also have to ask you, where do you think Wesley Hunt's votes go?
Well, first of all, yes, of course I expected it. I know John. I served with John, and you know, he's made some great decisions, but he also made some decisions that have riled the MAGA base and other conservatives in Texas. So yeah, I always thought it was going to go to a runoff. They've already spent $110 million trying to prop up Senator Cornyn. So we'll see what happens in terms of Wesley Hunt. Once again, a flip a coin on that. He was there as the outlier, thinking he could be the person to kind of mess it up, and all those voters are going to be courted pretty heavily by both candidates. So really, I think that's a toss-up. North Carolina, Michigan, Georgia, Kentucky, Ohio, Iowa, Texas, Maine, and New Hampshire. I thought out of all those, New Hampshire will ultimately decide who determines who controls the Senate.
Well, I think people who would look at this for the first time and say, wait a minute, it looks like Cornyn and Paxton are, you know, on different ends, right? You would say one has more of a right-leaning, more of a conservative voice. One is maybe a bit more a moderate, and yet you don't see either of them clinching that 50% threshold, which is why they're going into the runoff. Does that say something about what voters are feeling or what they're thinking right now?
Well, I think the better question is President Trump going to get involved and make a determination for one or the other? I know that the establishment in D.C., and they're not always right, want Cornyn. The question is, will President Trump go and actually make that happen and use his muscle there if in fact it's real? So once again, it's too close to call. I've been in these races before, and you know, really Wesley is going to play a role, so you're going to endorse. If he endorses, that may shift the needle a little bit as well.
Before I ask you about your own race, I mean, I have to ask you if you think the Iran conflict right now is going to have effect on voting, or even just outcome.
No, I don't think so. Listen, we've been in that conflict since 1979. I remember it. You know, when they actually took over the embassy, then we saw the Marine barracks bombing, William Buckley, you know, murdered, exporting terrorism around the region and the world forever. I thought what the president did was better than what Obama and Biden were doing. You know, giving cash and appeasing. At what point do we just say enough? You know, we're not going to deal with that anymore. Getting rid of that bully in the region, cutting off the head of the snake to allow our friends in that region to actually really expand and grow and live, you know, better lives because Iran's not there. So no, I don't think it plays a role.
Well, I know how you're going to characterize it with your own race, right? The New Hampshire Republican primary, I believe, is in September, right? So it's a little ways away, but I know that you're campaigning. What can you tell us about that race?
Well, first of all, I'm from New Hampshire. I was born at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. When my parents got divorced, I moved to Massachusetts. We've been back here for a while, and I was New Hampshire's ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa. And the race is going to be fun. I've already been campaigning. We have enough money if we didn't raise another penny to battle. We're fully staffed. And the grassroots, the MAGA, the people that voted for me before in Massachusetts and here in New Hampshire, the military folks, I did 39 years in the military, is retiring as a colonel. And it's going to be fun. I've always you know, liked these big battles. Remember, in the last race that you probably heard of, I was down 41 points and won by 7. So let the games begin.
All right. Well, I will tell you, first of all, thank you so much for your service. You're the only person I've ever heard say a campaign is going to be fun. Senator Scott Brown, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. Let's see if my next guest, Ben McAdams, also thinks it's going to be fun. He's a Democrat, former Utah congressman who's running for Congress in his own state again. Good to see you. I'll save whether or not you think it's fun what you're doing in a minute, but I got to ask you about what we're seeing in Texas. I'll flip it. Tallarico, Crockett. What are you looking out for? And I have to ask, if Tallarico wins, and from when I last looked, it seems that he's leading in the polls, would that suggest to you there is more an appetite for a moderate, more central candidate, one who is more unifying? Because, you know, Jasmine Crockett's a firebrand. She is, you know, really trying to win over the more progressive base there. So if he pulls this out and wins, what would that tell you?
You know, I think what it says to me is that Democrats are looking at being strategic and saying, what's it going to take to win? Like, we want to flip the Senate. We want to take back the Senate. We want our strongest player on the field. And that's what you see with this race. And, you know, I think really what's going to happen over the next few days is we're going to be looking and seeing at whoever wins this primary, do Democrats come together? Can we unify behind a candidate quickly and start looking towards the November election, while Republicans will have their runoff and will continue to be divided? It's up to Democrats to now unify behind whoever is the nominee and put all of our energies into winning that seat in November. And I think that's really not only in Texas, but around the country, is can Democrats unify?
I was going to ask you that. I mean, what does it say about the balance of power? What does it say about going into the midterm elections and about the Democrats' chances going in?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is there's, first of all, a lot of energy. Even in North Carolina, in Texas, there's a lot of energy behind in the Democratic primary. Voters are showing up. Voters are fired up. They want to make their voices heard. And I think that is a great sign going into the November election that Democrats are you know, finally unifying, finally coming together and saying it's more important to stand together and stand up to this administration than it is to continue to squabble amongst ourselves.
Well, if Tallarico wins, maybe more candidates need the Colbert interview that did or did not happen. You never know.
Yeah.
Maybe that had an effect. I have to ask you about Iran. I mean, you heard Senator Brown talk about whether or not it's going to have an effect on voters. You think it's going to have an effect on voters?
Yeah, I think we have to see. First of all, you know, I always hope for the best for the men and women in service for the United States. I hope for the best for the people of Iran. This regime has been, you know, has oppressed the people of Iran, and so we hope for the best. But look, certainly this is a gamble, and it's essentially running the United States government like a casino, going big and hoping for the best. But what really worries me is that we entered this war with what doesn't seem like there's a plan for really a well-defined objective or a plan to get out. It's just let's go big and see what happens. And so I think as it plays into November, what you're going to see is it takes the eye off the ball of what people are really concerned about. People are struggling to pay rent. People are struggling to afford healthcare. People are struggling to pay for the basic necessities of life. And this war is not going to bring down those costs for the American people. And so I think that's what's going to play out into the November election. If there is still conflict and uncertainty in the Middle East, that's certainly going to play into the election.
I mean, it could have an effect on oil prices, gas, inflation. All right, so tell me about your own race. Are you having fun? Are you having fun with it?
Yeah, I love to get out and talk to voters. It is energizing to be out there. You know, it is really exciting. So I represented Utah and from 2018 to 2020. Flipped the most Republican seat in the country to be won by a Democrat this year. I think this seat has now become one of the most exciting opportunities in the country for Democrats to flip a seat in Utah and make sure that Democrats take back the House. And so, you know, as a proven campaigner, somebody who has won tough elections in one of the reddest states in the country before, I'm excited and going to do it again and really just feel the call of public service to get out and serve our country in such a difficult time. I've never been more worried about the direction of the country than I am right now. And so to be in and working to flip this seat and to have a pickup opportunity in Utah is exciting.
Congressman Ben McAdams, thank you so much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, up next, new movement outside Nancy Guthrie's home today. 3 men showed up, seemed to pay extra attention to her front door. Plus, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos is speaking out again, addressing the mystery car caught on ring cam, the masked man's backpack, and why investigators are struggling to process that DNA evidence. Oh, and by the way, renowned death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan's coming on, sharing his theory on what he thinks might have happened to Nancy Guthrie. That's all next. Day 31 in the search for Nancy Guthrie, and there was movement at her home today. 3 men showed up and appeared to take a closer look at that front door of her house. Our Brian Enton was there, has more on that in just a moment. But first, I'll tell you, there was a new interview with the sheriff in the Nancy Guthrie case. It's raising a lot of questions tonight. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos told NBC News that investigators are, quote, definitely closer to tracking down the suspect or suspects in this case. But Nanos also shared there's still several things investigators haven't been able to identify, starting with a car caught on ring cam video about 2.5 miles from Nancy's home at around 2 a.m. the night she disappeared. Nanos says they're looking into it, just like hundreds of thousands of vehicles driving at that time that day. Nanos also says they have not identified the clothes worn by the masked man seen on the doorbell video outside Nancy's home, but says they're now learning that the backpack that he was wearing, while sold exclusively at Walmart, may not have been purchased there at all. Could have been resold online. And then there's this. Nanos says authorities are having challenges processing the DNA that was found at Guthrie's home, suggesting it might be a mixture from several people, not just 2. And one thing the Pima County Sheriff's Department has been consistent about is this. They believe Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home against her will. But forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan has his own theory about what may have happened here. I'm joined now by NewsNation's senior national correspondent Brian Enton, who's live on the ground there, and Joseph Scott Morgan, certified death investigator and forensic analyst and host of the Body Bags podcast. Great to have you both here. Brian, I'll start with you. What do we know about those men that showed up at Nancy's house today?
Well, we don't know much. I don't believe they were law enforcement based on what we saw, but they went around the side of the house. There were 3 of them. What was most interesting is they seemed especially interested in the front door, which is, of course, where, you know, we saw the blood drops. And then they opened the door, they went in. There was some speculation that they could be locksmiths, although I'm not sure that really makes any sense. But they were here for about an hour, and then they were gone, Jesse.
Brian, I want your take on what the sheriff had to say about getting definitely closer to a break. But let me just get to Joseph real quick. Joseph, I understand you might have 2 theories about what may have happened to Nancy that we might not be thinking of.
Well, yeah. I mean, first off, I think that, you know, going with what Brian is saying about the blood deposition there in the front at the door, I think that that is significant because this is an act of violence. And, you know, we have confirmed, or they have confirmed at least, that that is Mrs. Guthrie's blood that was deposited there. I have my own thoughts about the nature of the deposition and what it kind of stems from. And that was a sudden taking, if you will. The one shot there where you have that kind of expirated blood that is in that large patch. You've got the larger elements of blood there. That expirated blood, which I think are the tiny little dots right there, that's evidence of somebody probably coughing or sneezing out blood deposition from right there. And this blood is not indicative of, say, having a cut on your hand and it just kind of free falling.
And then you have this other idea about her age and her being a vulnerable victim?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys realize how many cases I've worked over the course of my career in Atlanta and New Orleans that involved ransom? Zero. You know, the cases I have worked, elder abuse. I've had people that have taken advantage of the elderly because they knew that they had money, and they bum rush them into their house and they snatch them out of there, or they do terrible things like murder inside of the house. You know, she is a much more valuable target to them if they had foreknowledge of whose mother she was. Right. That doesn't take a deep dive here. And so if they think that they can get anything out of her, so I think that comes to local knowledge. You know, who knows this? Is this somebody's, grandson that might be in the neighborhood that has some knowledge that's been talking about this for a protracted period of time? Right. I wonder if it's gang related. I wonder what they're pressing relative to the gang associations in Pima County, because this smacks of this relative to targeting her, right, seeking her out.
And let me, Brian, I'll give you a chance to respond to that since you've been on the ground and know this case better than anybody else. But also, I wanted your response to where the sheriff says they're definitely closer to finding a suspect. But I mentioned before all the seemingly gaps in this investigation, or at least what they know.
Yeah, and he's been saying that for a while. There were a few other things he said today that really stood out to me. One, he was asked about that new surveillance video of the car from 2.5 miles away. He said that it is part of the investigation, but he said that they are looking at hundreds of thousands of cars, which my jaw kind of dropped, like hundreds of thousands. How could that possibly be? I don't know if it's from traffic cameras, but that wasn't really encouraging to hear him say that. The other interesting thing was in terms of the backpack that the suspect was wearing that they've been saying was bought at Walmart all along, and we know they were going through the Walmart sales records. Today he said that they believe the suspect may have gotten it secondhand, so he didn't necessarily buy the backpack himself from Walmart, which is something we haven't heard the sheriff say before.
Brian, real quick, about 40 seconds to Joseph's theory. If someone bum rushed her, jumped in, maybe was trying to get something from the house, do you know if anything was stolen from her house?
Not that we know of, no. And I heard what Joseph was saying about the blood. One thing I've thought about is I think it may be an indication that she was alive when she left the house, because if she was already dead, you would think, I mean, I hate to talk like this, but you'd think they would have wrapped her up. Or why would there be those blood spots coming if she was already dead? So I think it's a sign that she was alive when she left.
Gentlemen, I wish we had more time to talk about this, because there's going to be a number of theories we go through. But Brian Enton, Joseph Scott Morgan, thank you both so much, as always.
You bet.
Thanks.
All right. So the sound of war is no longer a jet engine. It's a buzz. Drones. Cheap, small, hard to see, even harder to stop. From Ukraine to Iran, drones aren't just supporting the fight, they are the fight. But here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. What happens when they're not just in another part of the world? We'll discuss it next. Drones are no longer part of the story in modern warfare. They are the story. From Ukraine to Iran's expanding drone network, unmanned systems are rewriting how wars are fought, how militaries buy weapons, and how fast battlefields move. In Ukraine, we've seen a full-scale drone revolution, tens of thousands of low-cost FPV, first-person view drones deployed every month, and the design of these things is evolving in weeks, not years. Ukrainian forces are even using maritime drones to challenge Russian naval power in the Black Sea. Russia has responded to by fully institutionalizing drone warfare, from using them for real-time video feed, shortening the kill chain to minutes, using loitering drones to keep constant surveillance on the battlefield. And by the way, it's not just Europe. China reportedly dominates much of the global drone supply chain and is developing AI-enabled drones that can operate in swarms, okay? Swarm-capable AI systems. Now, as we think about this, Iran, okay? Iran has perfected the model of cheap drones that can overwhelm defenses and project power through proxies. NATO is racing to keep up and investing in technology to detect and intercept drones. So as we talk about this, on top of the constant buzz overhead, the persistent surveillance, the blurring of front lines, the psychological component, the real question now is not whether drones will define the next war. It's who can scale them fastest, defend against them best, and control what happens when AI starts making targeting decisions at digital speed. For this, I want to bring in somebody who knows a lot about drone warfare, Andrew Valkenburg. He's the owner of the drone company Strategic Logics and a retired Army officer who specialized in complex breaching operations, combat engineering. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you for your service. How important are drones to warfare now? Did I miss anything? And by the way, is the United States in any way leading the way, or are they playing catch up?
Yeah, thank you. I think that actually in a lot of ways, the U.S. is leading the way in high-end systems specifically. Even 15, 20 years ago, the U.S. was implementing autonomy, AI, long-range strike systems, high-dollar, high-precision systems. But in the low-cost, mass-produced, attritable drones, I think we're playing a little bit of catch-up. Modern war is now about like scale and speed. It's not really necessarily about sophistication. We optimized for exquisite platforms a long time ago, and relearning these processes and trying to match these models that we're seeing played on modern day battlefields is a learning curve. I think we're behind a bit in production tempo and possibly some procurement agility. And winning the next war isn't going to depend on who has the best drone. It's going to depend on who can adapt and replenish faster.
What about defeating a mass drone attack? You see Iran, they have this cheap disposable model. It's hard to stop. I mentioned swarms are a new thing. How do you defend against a swarm of these things?
Well, I think that, defense against these systems in all facets it's a layered approach or it's none. There's no real silver bullet for defeating any of these systems. I think that every system is optimized for a specific use case, environment, and situation, and defeating them is no different. Certain drones are fiber optically controlled that are employed all the time in Ukraine right now, and you can't jam those. You have to go after them with hard kills and kinetic strikes. And I think that layering our defense approach, whether it's on U.S. soil or globally, is the approach that we have to go for.
Just want to follow up on something, and I mentioned before, you talked about it too. I'm saying reportedly China dominates a huge share of the drone market, the components. How vulnerable are we? How vulnerable is the West to, access to motors, sensors, electronics? If there's a chokehold on that, what is the fastest fix realistically?
Yeah. I think you said it right. The West designs a lot of drones, but China owns a lot of the supply chain around subcomponents like motors and batteries and sensors. And I think that contrary to popular belief, there are quite a few companies right now producing massive scales of subcomponents right here in-house. And those companies care a lot about quality, care a lot about price, care a lot about accessibility. And so that problem is becoming less serious, I think, on the United States side, but it's not something we need to, pump the brakes on just yet. It's something that we need to take very, very seriously and continue working forward. It's like you said, the supply chains, when we started implementing regulations against Chinese components, it was about cybersecurity back in 2019. It wasn't necessarily about supply chain security. And I think if you're going to fight a sustained drone war, relying on adversary-linked supply chains is a recipe for disaster. And industrial independence is becoming national security.
100%. And sustained drone warfare, I mentioned the supply chain. What about the kill chain? What should we be thinking about in practical terms from spotting a target to destroying it if we're talking about war right now at potentially a digital speed? Am I understanding this correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Drones are collapsing surveillance and decision and strike and assessment into one continuous loop. And the side that shortens that loop is who's going to win.
Right.
Traditionally, we used to have to find, fix, track, target, engage, and assess, with different people, different steps. And now we're seeing one drone, sometimes one operator, like you said, in swarm operations, doing that all in minutes. Add AI into the mix. You're adding auto target recognition. You're adding assisted navigation. You're adding autonomous terminal guidance. And it's creating decision pressure on commanders. They have to act faster than ever in order to not slow down their drone operators. And conversely, units are having less time to move. I think that's why tactically it's viable, however, is because units have less time to think twice before they move or maneuver.
By the way, don't you have a drone with you? Was I wrong? Or do you have one with you?
Yeah, I do.
You didn't even, you should show that thing off.
Yeah, so this is the Matrix 7. I think we're blurred right now. Let me see if I can. Oh, geez.
Okay. No, it's good. It's getting its close-up shot. It's glamour shot there. What does that one do?
Let's see here.
What does
this is the Matrix 7. This is our flagship product at Tandem Defense, our new drone company under PowerUs. PowerUs is taking pretty seriously accessibility, and so is Tandem Defense. As a former acquisitions professional, the #1 frustration inside U.S. military supply chains is about accessibility.
Right.
It's because systems weren't previously compliant. They weren't American-made. They had long lead times. They weren't directly addressing a capability gap, and sometimes the cost was astronomical. And so accessibility to us is about solving those four facets and pushing those systems.
And I think you're doing a great job of this, and I think you have definitely provided an educational lesson, because I didn't know anything about drones. I've learned more about drones the last 2 nights than I currently have. Andrew Vackenberg, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, coming up, a political shakeup is underway. Big names, tough primary fights, and early results that could change the balance of power out in Washington. Who's winning, who's losing, what it means for the future of this country. We'll break it down next. Congress could be changing right before our very eyes. As primary results come in from states like Texas and North Carolina, tonight is not just about who wins. It's about what kind of leaders voters want next. In Texas, Republican Senator John Cornyn is heading to a runoff after failing to win a majority. He's being challenged by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and Congressman Wesley Hunt, although he's out of it. The question for Republican voters, do they stick with a longtime establishment senator, or do they move toward a more hardline conservative voice? On the Democratic side, in Texas, State Representative James Tallarico is currently ahead of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. This race is a test of style and strategy. Crockett has built a national profile with a very combative approach. Tallarico has run a more unity-focused campaign aimed at swing voters. Then you go to North Carolina. Former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper has won his party's primary for an open U.S. Senate seat. Cooper is leaning on his record of winning statewide in a purple. Republicans are backing former RNC Chair Michael Whatley. That race could help decide control of the U.S. Senate. And it's not just the Senate. House seats across the country are up for grabs, with control of the chamber potentially coming down to just a handful of districts. So what does it all mean? Recent polls show nearly 70% of Americans say this country is on the wrong track. Voters are tired of gridlock. They're tired of politics as usual. The question is not just who wins these primaries. It's what kind of Congress they're building for the future. Okay? And this is a frustration that you're not seeing on the left, you're not seeing on the right, you're seeing it all around. So I want you to pay very careful attention what happens for the next several hours. We're going to have the results down at the bottom. We're going to continue to follow it. We might not get the results for some time, but also follow this in the months to come.